Hello, everybody. My name is Miguel Perez-Milans. I'm co-editor-in-chief for Journal of Language Policy. And here with me is the other co-editor for the same journal, Kate Mencken.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to introduce today the co-editors of a special issue of Language Policy coming up that's entitled Examining the Growing Gentrification of Bilingual Immersion and Dual Language Education, that's slated for publication in August of 2021. So please be sure to look out for it. And so Juan and Garrett, could you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Juan Freire. I'm a assistant professor at Brigham Young University. And my research area is equity in dual language bilingual education.
And my name is garrettdelavan. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia State University, and I focus on equity and language education more generally.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for your important contributions in this special issue. I had heard about your work in this area, and because I also saw dual language gentrification happening in New York, as well as other places, I thought it would make a great special issue for the journal Language Policy, which is why I reached out to you and invited you to guest edit this special issue. What motivated you to explore this topic?
So this goes back to 2010, when Garrett and I were colleagues in our doctoral program at the University of Utah. For one of our classes in spring 2010, with Professor Veronica Valdez, we decided to do some research on dual language programs in Utah. Garrett went to one of the schools and he came shocked to me saying, "Juan, do you realize that there's all white students in that dual language program?" At that time, I hadn't really thought about it. I had been a dual language teacher at a very diverse school in Salt Lake City. And he said, we should do this. We should do some research across the state to see the demographic trends in this program. So we went ahead and do that and presented this work at AESA in October 2010, a presentation called Utah's Dual Language Immersion Boom. Is it listening to cultural differences or reinforcing differences in power? Then we invited Veronica to be part of our study, and we presented this work at ARA in 2011. And that's how this started.
Yeah, I like, Juan, that you went back to the origins, right? Because the Utah model, we think, has really been the catalyzing policy event, right? That has broadened, I think, the critique, right? And one of the things we do in the special issue is to trace what different kinds of critique there have been that we call gentrification, and increasingly other scholars are using that metaphor, but tracing it back to as far back as Guadalupe's seminal piece around the cautionary note of two-way programs and the kinds of politics that go on between racial groups and language-speaking groups there. What excited me in particular as well is that we're not just talking about what schools are doing, but how policy is framed, and we can get into ideology of languages and broader trends like the neoliberal sort of takeover of policy in general in the United States and abroad, globally, but in particular how language education became yet another tool of people marketing themselves in the job market as human capital, essentially.
Another question that we wanted to ask you is about the hot debates and controversies that are in the literature about this topic, and the ways in which you have engaged with those in your special issue. Whether you could tell us a little bit about this.
This special issue has 7 articles in which we view gentrification from various angles, from different perspectives. It includes administrators' voices. It includes parents' voices. It includes teachers' voices. Something that it does is that it includes discussion that has been overlooked from a gentrification lens. Gentrification has been discussed in this special issue from an equity perspective, And something that I really enjoy in this special issue is that it also brings solutions. The special issue also talks about resistance by minoritized communities. It also includes a historical overview of the gentrification of dual language bilingual education that is in the introduction to the special issue, co-authored by Garrett and Kate. And we go back to the early 1960s till today, and we examine and discuss how gentrification has happened across history. We acknowledge the work by many equity scholars who have engaged in gentrification discussions without necessarily calling it gentrification at that time.
What it added to the conversation was this idea of really having a touchstone that goes beyond language issues, right? Urban gentrification issues, I think, are so widely understood as a space in which capitalism and pricing and urban housing costs, et cetera, is really operating in racist ways, right? To push out communities of color that have historically had a space of their own that they could afford, and that whites who have had historically more access to the neoliberal era's, economic opportunities, are finding the city interesting again. They're coming back from the suburbs in ways that their parents didn't, right, in the white flight era. And so that politics, I think, is really on the radar screen of people across disciplines. And we're interested in bringing more people into the conversation that aren't necessarily just scholars of language. And we thought that this metaphor of gentrification is a way to do that, right? And I think it also helps people within our field think about more than language. And one of the things that we're finding exciting is a Flores and Chaparro piece that came out in language policy just in 2018 that's really pushing a merging of a sort of racist, anti-racist consciousness in our research, but going back to the materialism of political economy analysis of what is actually happening in the neighborhoods around our dual language programs. How can we conceptualize policy as something larger than just delivering instruction in certain languages, mixing them in different ways? I mean, there's a vibrant conversation about what exactly we're doing with language, but we'd like this special issue to push the conversation also into what are we doing for the communities that were historically served by bilingual education as one of the principal means that they had to access comprehensible curriculum, but also allow for the endurance of more than one language, right, in our lives in this very monoglossic context of the United States. Study after study, we see white middle class or upper middle class parents, the ones moving in and controlling to a large extent policy discussions at the school, district, and state level, right? Either they are actively sort of exerting their racial and economic privilege in their interactions there, or they are the ideal audience that is being talked to. And several of our pieces in the issue talk to that. Those are the kinds of things that we want to do with this special issue, is to push new avenues beyond just the traditional critique of the two-way program that's trying to mix racial and linguistic groups. We want to push it into further analyses of discourse. And that's really what we want to return to, is how can we have a big tent where privileged students, yes, can enter and learn more than one language in this effective medium, but at the same time, they don't crowd out those who used it to kind of equalize their chances at accessing the good life in the United States.
As a reader who hasn't yet read all the contents of the special issue, but when I see this notion of gentrification, so one of the questions that came to my mind first is that, okay, so these terms, they have their own histories, their own social life, they come from particular traditions, and it's always very powerful and interesting to think about what is it that these terms allow us to do that otherwise we couldn't do without them. And that's why your answer before, so bringing in the material, the spatial and the material focus into the discussion is so important, but also it brings, it allows to connect this discussion that we are having right now in language policy studies with what all the conversations that are taking place in parallel in other disciplines in anthropology, geography, sociology as well.
And I think in terms of language policy theory, a contribution of this issue is really making this point about what happens in language activism when we are inattentive to race, when we marginalize race, when we decenter race. And I think that this is, the entire issue is a cautionary note to that effect. And it's really analyzing where we are today and how we got here. So I want to thank you very much for what I think is going to be a great special issue. We are really excited to have this special issue. It's going to be coming out in the journal Language Policy in August 2021. The editorial introduction and 2 of the papers are going to be free downloads so that you can access those easily, especially when the first issue first comes out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a great opportunity to be guest editors, and we appreciate also the chance to give this little preview.
My pleasure. Muchas gracias.